This evening's Dharma talk is titled Production Compulsion. What the heck does that mean? So compulsion. We all have some understanding of that just in our everyday functioning. So production compulsion is to point out, to reflect on our activity of something happens, we see something, we look at something, something shows up in our memory, and then we have a compulsion to produce something else. So we actually cover up the very thing that's appearing, whether it's the kitchen wall or the steps as we're going down out to the parking lot, or as we're meeting our friend, our enemy for that matter, meeting someone, we, instead of just receiving that as it is, just the color that it is, the shape, the tone, the texture, the sound, the smell, we do something else with it. We have a compulsion to produce something, to say something, to think something. We may not say much. We may just notice that we're not really receiving what's there. Where as soon as something happens, we immediately have an idea, judgment, evaluation, a feeling, an emotion. Something happens and we don't feel good about that. We might not know in terms of our thought patterns or our ideation around any given thing, what that's about or why that's happening. We just notice that we don't like it, or it doesn't feel good. And there's no real, it doesn't come along with a little explanation of here's why you're feeling this way. So what do? We make that up. We invent it. We produce something with it. Causes and conditions occur. The first one, of course, is being born. And then we begin to add and subtract and divide and judge and evaluate and make our way this way and stay away from that and get towards that. And as it's taught here, it is not about stopping that or controlling that or making it fall into certain parameters, which is taught in some places. And again, not incorrect. I'm not here to argue and say you should only do what I say. You shouldn't even do what I say, even if you're here. You should do what you say. Do what you want to do. If what I say makes some sense to you, then you might want to give me the benefit of the doubt and try this for 20 years or so. I don't see any smiles. Sound like I'm serious? I am. Take some part of your life and just dedicate that to seeing what is fundamentally true. And you might have to go through a whole lot of things that you compulsively believe. Produce a pleasant thing, something that magnetizes you, or bring your awareness to that. Just the bare attention, just raw receiving, just receive, give it your attention. Notice the qualities, the textures, the speed of which something is coming, and then notice the speed at which you immediately respond. Make no response. And when I say make no response, probably can't do that. I know I can't. So I know about it. But notice the way in which whatever occurs, you have some kind of comment about it, some kind of, sometimes it's even like petty thoughts about things or gossipy thoughts. You don't have to get rid of those. You don't have to do anything, as I said previously, but you could just be aware of that kind of petty quality of the mind to just constantly add on chatter about this. It should be, it shouldn't be. They shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't be thinking that. I shouldn't. It's exhausting. Production compulsion. Sometimes that gets so aggravating or so difficult or so disturbing that we want to cover it up. We want to stop it. We want to, all kinds of ways. You might go to the movies. You might move to Philadelphia. You might have some, you might go, I'm going to go and do something. And again, going back to what I said previously, not that you shouldn't, but it might be good to take some awareness, prioritize some aspect of your consciousness to just receive, just be aware of what's happening. That's not always so easy, because sometimes if we're just doing that, we're vulnerable, because then everything starts creeping our way. All the negativities that we've been able to keep at bay start to, as what's the image sometimes used, crawling up the edge of up the walls of the well. Spiders. Or maybe not. Maybe you don't have that kind of a experience. But more than likely, there's some aspect of your life, your experience, daily experience, weekly, monthly. We need to do this. We want to do that. We shouldn't do this. We should do that. We got to stop doing that. We got to start doing something else instead of just what? Just receive. You could spend some time. You could devote some time to just receiving. This is what this meditation hall is about. This Zendo. Sit down. Sit in a symmetrical posture. This is what this form is about. Just receive. I'm not saying you couldn't receive laying down or leaning against a backrest. You could. But since we actually can't find our mind, we can find our body pretty much, but it's hard to find that part of our consciousness that we call our mind, that area where things seem to be out of control. Out of control, I'm saying, if you try to, you can't do a little bit of that, but wound, sticky. I mean, you could sit in a symmetrical posture. It could be this one best, I feel. Hold still. All the senses. And just receive. Whatever's happening in an apparent interior way, the mind, consciousness, things moving, thoughts coming and going, emotions. Just observe what that include. Just alert posture. And you will find over time, if you do enough, that the mind is going this way and this way and that way and this way and up and down, back and forth. Compulsion, grasping, rejecting, passion and aggression, and then ignorance, those three. You'll find that whole thing begins, that spinning, that grasping, rejecting begins to slow down. I'm not saying it is going to go away particularly, but some of the speed, some of the energy, the compulsive part of it tends to slow down. The aggravation or the pain or the ragged edges of that may stay for a long time. And my recommendation to anyone who's listening to me is just observe, just look, just receive whatever's happening. Go look in the mirror, as I say over and over again. Go, how much did you have to say about what shows up in front of you as this body-mind complex? You have something to say about it, but we don't have a lot. It's kind of foisted upon us. Is that a word, foisted? Okay, thanks. Nishikai knows a lot about words. He's very wordy. So what am I coming back to? What I come back to over and over and over again. Please, my friends, just observe whatever is happening. May not get easier. Probably will, like anything you practice. But it probably will not without some kind of, the conventional word is discipline, some kind of sit down, hold still, and observe what the mind continues to grasp, reject, and shut down on, simply put. And eventually the fundamental misunderstanding, the fundamental mistake will show up. I don't necessarily know if there's a way where you can go after it directly and get it by the throat, if it had a throat. But you will eventually see that the one, or the subject, or the me feeling, the I, that which is referred to when we say, use those personal pronouns, that is insubstantial. It's unreal. Unless that is seen, then we will continue to grasp just uh, compulsively at someone who feels some way about something. And that something could be here, could be out there, could be somewhere in between, could be a combination of things. To take any kind of position on anything just perpetuates the karma that brought you into this human realm in the first place. To take any position on it. And you'll notice, if you've been doing this for a while, it becomes more and more subtle, more and more like you're not quite seeing what you need to see. You're not quite seeing that. We see it, and it's like it's just moves away or something. So we're looking for some kind of very subtle reference point. Sure.
With those positions that we're taking, in my experience, maybe there's some contrast with if something changes, I might be have a little bit more of a willingness to switch the position, but I don't think I've ever recognized a place where I've been without a position. Is that something that's possible?
No. It's possible to be without a position, but not to recognize it. If you recognize it, it's a position. Keep coming. I need help. We can't do this alone. Nice flowers. Spent a lot of time on that. More about that? Anyone else along that same line, or any line for that matter? Claire?
What do you do when you find yourself in love with someone, and when you're sitting and they come to your head and you don't add to how you feel about them, or you don't take away, and it seems like the fact that you love them is just revealed to you? How do you tell them? What do you do?
Don't do anything with it. Don't tell them unless you have to. Don't do anything. Since you're asking, and you're referred to, well, that comes to you while you're doing sitting meditation,
yeah.
Just observe what happens. Observe the wall, observe how your knees feel, observe the emotion, observe the feeling that you described, however that and watch what occurs. Just observe what occurs. Do nothing with it. No production. The compulsion might never go away, but you don't have to hook up your vocal cords or your mental apparatus to try to get somewhere else and try to figure out what to do. Do no calculation. Calculation, if it's based on a lack of clarity around who and what each person is, about what this fundamentally is, then any calculation is built on a foundation of misunderstanding, and it will just perpetuate the cycle of suffering, basically, or discontent, or difficulty, abrasiveness. You follow me? So just as anybody, as much as we can, just observe. Just hold still, watch. This is what the Buddha, as far as I know, this is what the Buddha's awakening was not about awakening to some kind of wonderful God realm, some kind of happiness, some kind of nirvana in the conventional sense of bliss and peace and quietude. And it was more about awakening to the fundamental nature of suffering, which was difficult. So he awoke to the confusion that is caused by grasping at a self, an ego, and grasping at another, a friend, an enemy, anything. So very individual. This doesn't mean that you're not going to fall in love with someone. This does not mean that you're not going to be very hungry and go get some food. It doesn't mean that you're not going to have passion, aggression, and ignorance happening. It's just that when it occurs within an open dimension of being, where the grasping is at a minimum. There's going to be some, because we're human beings, so we have hands. These graspers. give me that. So we're going to do some of that, but it's when we overdo that based on fear, when we overdo that grasping based on craving or lust or intense desire for something else. Sometimes that intense desire for something else will take us into war. We're so upset about what's happening, how we feel, and we're so difficult that instead of being responsible, the ability to respond to the negativity and see that it's our negativity, instead we project it out on the world, and we go to war with the very aggression that actually is our creation. It's called a projection, or blaming someone else for how we feel. It's not that they didn't, as I've said before, not that they didn't come up and trigger that or do something that caused you to have an emotion or a feeling about something, but they didn't pour any feelings into you. It's your feeling. It's so simple. It's such a simple thing to say, but yet in the midst of intense emotion that has been triggered by someone else's activity, or could be someone's just stumbling around, not even realizing they're triggering something in you. If that aggression or that difficulty has not been observed or seen, or you're not responsible for who you are, your emotions, then the tendency is to blame the person for actually causing your feelings. It's all over the place. Make movies out of that. Without that, you wouldn't have Groundhog Day. Sir.
Are we producing our own negativity?
Looks that way.
Could you say how that production occurs?
It occurs because of causes and conditions. So whatever is happening that doesn't look like you're doing anything about it, probably some kind of karma is coming to fruition in terms of causes and conditions that are all over the place. They're in your feet. It's in your walk. It's in your tone of voice. It's in your relationships with others. It's all over. It's all pervading everywhere, but there's no solid being anywhere. It just really looks like it. It's very convincing to think there are lots of different beings, yes.
To what degree, or do we have any say-so in the production of that negativity?
Not much.
Do we have any say-so in the cessation of the negativity?
We have some say-so in that we can slow down, and we can begin to see the mechanism that grasps at someone and rejects something else. That we can begin to watch that mechanism, and when the observer quality gets really strong, as opposed to the adding, subtracting, dividing, the energy all going into manipulation and trying to get somewhere, what's sometimes called materialism, then things tend to settle down without someone coming up and making everything settle.
I'm wondering about the mechanism. To what degree is that actually something that we can observe, like this gear fitting into this gear and turning?
It would be nice if it were that, because then you could stop it. You could take the gears apart. So it is a cause and effect, but it happens on a more it's not mechanical like that. It looks like a cause and effect, and then the closer we get to it, we begin to lose our way. The path that we were on starts to fall apart, and the gears that we were looking for that at first were, this causes that, they start to become less and less crisp and clear. And it's not that the clarity or the crispness of our insight or our perception isn't there. It's just that it doesn't have the object that is reifying or validating the veracity of what we're seeing. So we lose. There's less plus and minus. This is true. That's not true. The whole polarity thing starts to collapse. So at the same time, everything starts to become very vivid it also our conclusions about what we're seeing start to lose their outline or their presence. I don't know how else to say it. I can't come up with another word. So this is our introduction to a vast spaciousness that is the mind. The traditional word for this is vipassana or maha-vipassana, the great panoramic awareness that does not sustain a separate self. The ego, use a very strong image, will starve to death there. It can't live in that kind of openness because it needs reference points of success, even the reference point of failure. It needs the reference point of other people, really good people, really good friends, really bad enemies, or people who are problematic. This is what war is based on. I sometimes say, don't go to war, but don't go to peace either. Take no position. If you take a position, it's not wrong, not like a bad person. But if you take any kind of position on anything, then you miss the very karma that is constantly taking a position as your lifetime, which is necessary. It's necessary to really see who you are. Well, if you see what this is, you see, like it says in the teachings, the Buddha saw all of his past lives. Well, it sounds pretty fancy. Like, yeah, I saw that one lifetime, that one, and then there was that other one that wasn't so good, but it's in the past now. No, it's here. Don't believe a word I say. Find out for yourself. Yun.
Is compulsion, even when it seems instantaneous, always have a position that underlying that?
Probably. I mean, to use that word is compulsion. You have a compulsion to act. You have a compulsion to run away. More?
Is the position the fuel?
Is the what the fuel?
The position that underlies, say, a compulsion, is that fueling the compulsion?
Could be somewhat. It's the grasping at something else. It's the desire that's basically the what the Buddha said. Life is suffering or frustration or difficulty or dissatisfaction. And why is it that way? We want something else. So it doesn't sound like that makes any sense until you look at it closely, and then you can see that whatever's happening, you're not exactly, I'm not talking about being particularly content, but we want something's not right with what's happening. Have you noticed?
Question from Greg in the UK.
All the way from the UK. Very good.
Any tips to go?
Any tips?
Any tips to go beyond I am meditating or I am observing to just perceiving without a solid identity doing the meditating?
Do a lot of it. That's my main tip. Sit down, hold still, just observe, just receive. Do a lot of it and schedule it so that you won't do it just when you feel like meditating. Sit down, hold still, just observe what moves, which will be the mind which wants this, doesn't want that. Indulges in this, or doesn't. You don't have to interrupt it by some kind of a comment on I shouldn't be thinking that. But if you do, then just watch that. I would say do a lot of it, and all the senses open as much as you can, just be on receive. When you do that, that means there's not going to be much correcting going on, not much of a commentary on or criticism or evaluation going on. Active. If the evaluation comes up on its own, I seem to be dozing off, or I seem to not be very aware, and just look at that. Don't add on any other comment onto it. So less is better, or don't do the math. Don't come up with any conclusions about anything. Yes.
Question from Bhaskar. What does the third poison, ignorance, produce?
So passion, aggression, the passion, of course, is craving. Aggression is getting rid of, chopping up in pieces and killing or ending, destroying. And ignorance produces the illusion of duality, that there's someone to ignore. If you ignore what this is, then there's an ignorer. I'm ignoring, or that out there is ignored. So it's not that it's not seen, that its fundamental nature is ignored. It looks like something else. That's ignorance. It's the dualistic setup, and it's a setup, and it's perpetuated by the other two. You can kind of see passion because it's grasping and after something, or explaining something, or blaming something, or taking credit for something. On and on, all of those, and you can see aggression because that's more obvious. More difficult to see that you're ignoring. That's why it seems to be necessary to slow down, watch what moves.
Some of the ways that the teachings come up with, like, we cover up Buddha nature, it kind of invites the area of something else that we aren't seeing. I'm just wondering if, while we're embodied, if the extent of what we can do is to just see how we manipulate what comes in front of us.
Paraphrase. Give me a simple. I understand what you're saying, but make it very simple. Otherwise, I have to elaborate on what you said.
Is there something beyond the manipulation that we can see?
Sure. You ready? Nothing happens. It's really disappointing. I mean, we wanted something to happen. Clear?
If we keep working towards doing less, how do we make lasting bonds with other people?
How do we make what with other people?
Form relationships and make bonds with other people.
Find out who's making the bonds. Find out who this is, so that whatever kind of quote unquote relationship occurs, it has a sense of genuineness to it. That is not about making any demands on anyone for anything, wanting things to be other than the way they are. Is very nature description of craving for something else. And quite often, if that happens between two people, whether it's warfare or lovefare or just ignoring others, there's some kind of energy happening there that tends to pull or push or shut down. Pull, passion, push, aggression, or shut down, ignorance. So less is better. So, and the way to work with this, according to this tradition, according to my understanding, is we don't really have any say-so about others so much, a little, but not much. But we do have some say-so about this. Sit down, hold still, watch the movement in the mind, because the movement that is in the mind is the same movement that's out in the open with our interaction with others. Be very clear about your own functioning, so that when you are interacting with others, you begin to see the degree to which you're inventing the person you're relating to. You're not really seeing who's there. I'm not accusing you of anything or anyone, but in order to really see who is there, what is actually there, we have to first begin to see the degree to which we're projecting our ideas, our beliefs, our opinions, our assumptions, our productions on others. So it's about awareness. It's not about getting somewhere. There's nowhere to get, but don't take my word for it. Yes.
I think you said something about endeavoring to see the raw awareness. What if it seems like we can't see the raw awareness?
That's what you have to see. I was talking to someone else about this earlier. Am I tiring you all? Oh, that's right. You have a baby. So it is about it's about seeing that. That's still awareness. Even though all you see is negativity, all you see is crappy feelings. All you see is a boring day, or a day that's just filled with irritation, or people triggering things in you that are irritating, and so on. The less you do about that to conclude anything, or to figure anything out, or to change it into something else, or manipulate it, and the more you're able to just receive your life. You've heard me say probably dozens, if not hundreds of times, don't miss your life. Whatever's showing up in your life, it needs to show up. It's your life. So if you're sitting here and things start to happen that seem out of your control, it's probably true. It probably is out of your control. And so the idea is to receive that so that your relationship to that can be one that is genuine. It's coming out of your awareness of it, and your being generous by giving that, whatever that situation is, your attention.
Are there causes and conditions behind what show up for us inside our thought process that we can't see?
You might never see that. What you might see that you can't see it, which is still awareness. To see that you can't see that is awareness, rather than you can't see that, so now we want to dig and see if we can bring that out. Whatever you need to see will show up. The less you do. When I'm saying the less you do, I'm not saying go into just doing less by having your production be on a real low level of thoughts, spinning thoughts around and around. If you're having spinning thoughts going around and around, and you seem to be taken off in a daydream, just observe that. Nothing lasts. Especially will not last the less you do with it to add to it, evaluate it, push on it, explain it, do anything, do nothing with it, no production. And I don't know if you can do no production other than just to see how much you're producing, so that starts to back off on its own, because it's not that you need a conclusion about it, but it seems to be just a lot of energy going out. You could just sit down and hold still and see what is moving for yourself. See what is occurring in your mind or in the world. Very difficult, because the world is constantly clamoring for some kind of, you agree with me, or do you disagree with me, or is this right? Is this wrong? How often do we hear that? Do you think that's right? Do you think I should do that? Should I? Don't do anything. Less is better. It's called, what's that fancy word? We don't do anything.
Shanti.
Yeah. What's the English version of that? Patience, yes.
How do we just receive the compulsion?
That's how it's done. To see that it's compulsion, see that we're driven to pulled into something else, pulled into this, or pushed away from this. And quite often there's a whole bundle of emotions and feelings that are unsearchable. We can't really find the source of that, but you can find the leading edge of those feelings, and that's where we should put. I'm gonna should anybody, I would say, put your attention right on the leading edge of the feeling. Nothing. You don't even go so far as to say this sucks. You just feel the texture of that emotion. Probably will not feel very comfortable. And I'm not saying we have to torture ourselves. I'm not saying go and make it worse, and go without clothes and go without food, and unless you're fasting, of course. But I mean, don't torture yourself into it. The Buddha tried that. He saw he was wondering what was the sickness, aging, and death. What was that about? What was this? And he went into that to see what it was. And of course, went back through the 12 links on the chain of existence. So we're doing something similar by just sitting down and just, so what is this? What fundamentally is this? And we, insofar as we wanted to do that intellectually or conceptually, we could do it with the 12 links in the chain of existence, which I'm not going to go into here now, but it's just a way that can't have death, sickness, aging, and death without birth. You can't have birth without becoming, and you can't have becoming without grasping. You can't have grasping without desire. Yes.
If we're just receiving the compulsion, will that compulsion? Could that compulsion be acted out or acted upon or manifested somehow?
It may, if it causes and conditions being what they are, if it needs to happen, if the less you're doing, then the more that whatever needs to happen with that particular compulsion will fulfill itself. This doesn't mean that if you feel like killing people, you're necessarily gonna, oh, now that I'm just watching what happens, I guess I'm just gonna start killing and validate it. Well, it's my karma to be mean or be cruel or something like that. But the lowest level of that will begin to show up. So if you're practicing in this way, it's unlikely that negativity is going to manifest in some kind of harmful way for others or even for yourself. The way Trungpa Rinpoche talked about that was make friends with yourself. Instead of trying to cover up or change or modify or do an overhaul on your negativity, sit down and just be genuine. Just be the life that is showing up here as this human being that was born however a number of years ago and was given a name and was trained to do this and to do that and go to school and how to add, subtract. I know you were pretty good at that. Just adding and subtracting. Sit down and watch that. Actually look at the way that whole situation works without approving of it or disapproving. Less is better. And so that's how you would, if you were making friends with an unruly 8-year-old child or 1-year-old child, for that matter. But you would work with that person in a way that would fundamentally help them, rather than, as sometimes parents, especially in days gone by, would just beat up their kids to get them to not act a certain way. Not so good. So we also don't want to beat ourselves up. You could actually have a sense of openness or kindness to yourself. It's not easy to do that when you feel the raw and rugged edges of your personality as it is submerged far enough so that you don't get evaluated by others trying to be somebody else. This doesn't mean you go the other way and start acting out the negativity. So what do we do with that? The way I talk about it, and meant to be helpful, maybe this helps you, maybe it won't, but you should feel the emotions, but not necessarily convert them into activities or words, but feel the leading edge of that emotion and just feel that emotion, feel that texture of that, the quality of that, rather than jump away from it by calling it depression or jump away by calling it anxiety. I'm not saying that it isn't anxiety or that it isn't depression, but to use those words to try to identify it or go to somebody else, even me, find out what it is. You need to find out. All I'm going to do is turn you around and say, keep looking, be aware of this. Yes.
Is there anything that's important about us bringing it to the teacher so that they can turn us around into it?
Yes.
How is it, especially those that have been practicing with you for a while kind of know that's what we're going to get, so you could just tell yourself, this is my practice, my path, I need to look at it. So how, what is the dynamic that's different when you bring it to the teacher and they point you back into it?
So it could happen either way. One could, you'll know. The teaching person isn't going to track you down and try to correct you. If you're functioning, then function. Just like Shoka, this is his 10th day in solitary retreat. And he's probably wondering if I'm going to come over and see him or not. But I don't really decide things like that too much in advance. I probably will go see him, but I don't know when. He's only got 10 more days to go, I think, 11. So I'm in this space. He's in his space. I'm just using him as an example. All of you, most of you, a lot of you here anyway, have done solitary retreats, and that's a difficult time. You're totally by yourself. You have nothing else. That's kind of the elimination diet. You eliminate everything that you can without going overboard, and not eating and not sleeping and not having any clothing or something like that. And you just make it very simple. You're just here, you're just sitting, and you just watch what continues to come after you, or what continues to show up, or tends to flash, or submerge, or just watch that activity. Because the imputation or the belief that there's someone that's a solid being that's happening to, that seems to be the underlying structure that perpetuates the confusion called suffering, that there's someone suffering. So as far as what you're asking, I think it's so different between student teacher, the difference between the teaching person and the student is just different. The chemistry is different. So you've heard me say the way I practice as a teacher is I endeavor to meet people where they're at. And that basically means leave them alone. Unless they show up in a way that I have permission to say, go join the Peace Corps. Have I told you to do that? No, that's right. I told you not to do that. So it would show up differently, if that's what you're asking me. Anything further about that?
Maybe I could try a different way of asking it. Just, is there something that the teacher can point at when you bring your negativity to that teacher that you couldn't point yourself to?
Well, my experience with both of my teachers, they functioned with me in such a way that I couldn't help but see what they didn't say, this is it. They didn't point a little bit, but not much. Basically, it was triggering my own insecurity about wanting to be approved of, wanting them to approve of me. You want me to approve of you? Oh, I'm not gonna. You've noticed that. That doesn't mean I wouldn't be friendly or be helpful, of course. Further questions? Shoto?
Is the relative closeness to a teacher I'm thinking like a monk situation versus maybe someone that sees you from far away. Does that relative closeness allow that student to get a more potent teaching from you?
I really don't know. I couldn't say, because the causes and conditions that arise between teacher student, between someone who I have no idea if somebody in Borneo or Sumatra or somewhere isn't listening to this and isn't getting a lot of help, maybe from what you said, maybe more from that. So there's no way to know. Whereas someone who's living here, who's fully ordained as a monk, I would think that there would be more training going on with that person, just because they're here and they're here. They want this kind of help. They want this kind of a forum, and they're willing to go through the negativity and the difficulty that it takes to do this kind of an exercise, the exercise of endeavoring to see what is true for yourself. That is not easy, because it's so easy to, in the other direction, to go to what you think is true. What you think is true is unreal. It's a concoction. What is actually true is a realization that you can't disagree with it, because there is no polarity there. But you have to see it yourself. You can encourage you. Teaching person can't do it for you, no matter what their title or how high their pyramid is that they sit on top of. Let's have a really good question now.
I don't know, it's a really good question, but it's a question. We do a lot of studying here about Buddha nature, what it is, and so on the cushion, I might be looking for the things that I've learned. Is that a disadvantage to
No.
be doing that?
when you're sitting on the cushion and you're sitting down, you're holding still, it's just about observing. And that observing may be thinking about Buddha nature, thinking about the Tathagata, thinking about the meaning of those words, or thinking about something you just read an hour or two ago. It may be doing that. I don't have, if you haven't noticed, I don't say follow your breath. I just say watch what moves. It might be your thought patterns. And those thought patterns might be remembering a vacation that you had a couple years ago. It's only about awareness. It's not about the content of the awareness. It takes a while to see this because the tendency to want to fix or correct or be more peaceful or not have negative feelings is so powerful that when we sit really still, we kind of get a credential for just sitting still. After a few weeks, few months, a few years, we realized we could sit really still. But it doesn't change a damn thing. Have you noticed? The understanding is if we hold really still, we begin to see what moves. And we see that anytime anything is moving, it's creating more and more and more confusion because we get magnetized by this and we get repelled by that. And then we something else completely blocks everything out like smoke, shuts it out, so we can't see it. And as long as there's someone, then that someone, if we think there's someone, then that someone is going to think there's something else, something we can get to, something we can grasp or join. I wish that I could say it more clearly. I feel very inept. Do I look inept? Say yes. Yes.
Do the first two of the Noble Truths make sense? Can you say more about that seeming circularity?
The life is suffering. So life is difficult or abrasive or not fulfilling and feels we're always grasping at this and rejecting that. So there's that. That's the Buddha's just was pointing out. Life is dissatisfaction, and it is. We're not saying that there isn't something that relieves that. I'm not saying that we don't have some pleasure. The same nerve endings that feel pain are the same ones that feel pleasure. So we're not saying that isn't happening, but we're saying that those are not two different things. And so the second noble truth is, or the first noble truth is life is suffering. The second noble truth is wanting whatever is happening to be a little bit different, or to be much clearer, or much deeper, or much more enlightened, make more sense, be more fulfilling. And then the third one, you want me to go on, or you want me to just talk about those? So the third one is this can come to an end, that suffering can come to an end. And then the fourth one, of course, is the path of train the mind so that you can see clearly the way in which you're creating that situation. You have a specific question about it?
Is life no longer suffering if we no longer want it to be something else?
So what seems to happen in that area, that's a provisional teaching, which gets us started, gets us to look at the situation, which makes some sense on some level. On the initial level of looking at it, yeah, I want something else. And this makes, I'm not, the other way of talking about it, I'm not content. I'm not okay with the way things are. I want something else. And then practicing what's sometimes called voluntary suffering, to sit down, hold still, and watch how the mind is in some kind of a turmoil all the time about things. And then eventually what the fundamental discrepancy or misunderstanding is that there is someone, that there's a solid being. Just because there's a body-mind complex, that we were so identified with this body, we think we are this body, even though we might suspect there's something else is the case. So training ourselves to see clearly the one who, the sufferer, or the one who is having the difficulty is seen through. But the suffering may come or it may go, but one will not be too concerned about that anymore. Whole success and failure, suffering, pleasure, pain, getting something, losing something. it will not have the force that it had before you understood that there wasn't any solid being. So you could still suffer. They're not going to tell you that because they're, them guys. They're going to tell you that. They want you to practice. They want you to meditate. No promises. Trungpa Rinpoche used to say that quite often. There's no guarantees when he said it with an accent. But he said that quite a bit, I think. Can't promise us anything. Darn. It was like he'd say, here's what you need to do to train your mind, but no guarantees. Hey, this is not sounding too good. But what else was I going to do? I had to do something about it. It's just too difficult without some kind of a practice. So life is suffering, but if you can cover that up with some kind of illusion or some kind of golf cart or something, some other way of working with your life that takes up time until you slowly age and go back into the elements. Some people, quite a few people are just doing that. And it's not wrong. It's just the way most human beings live. So, but if you want to see what this is, then this is a way to do that. Ishikai.
Do we have a choice to see our karma, or is that our karma also?
I only have those two. You're not going to give me any more. Yeah. So, I talk and other people talking about choicelessness is because it looks like we're making choices, but actually the causes and conditions that bring us into any given situation are coming out of a unsearchable complex of causes and conditions that are not just a simple cause and effect, or this caused that, caused that. So I think there's some ability to decide to live at this monastery, to decide to set aside some time in our life to just practice, to train our minds to see clearly what this is, and to even in our path, on the Bodhisattva path, to dedicate our lives to others, just helping others work with their life and help them to work with their suffering and not being too concerned about our own. More?
Is there a difference in that kind of choice to see the truth versus acting out of self-centeredness?
Paraphrase. You knew that was coming.
I don't know how to ask it.
Want Jason to help you? Okay, with you. Shoda can help you. Can you paraphrase what he said? Pretty good. Say it again. I'll try to respond. Can you do that? Can say
Probably not, but I can talk about it a little.
Well,
Is there a
that's-
difference between making choices out of self-centeredness versus, and this is where I'm fuzzy, making choices out of maybe not that area, or maybe out of awareness?
Okay, yeah. So the self-centeredness is looking for a result. The self-centeredness, even though it might show up as, you could be a person who helps others. You could be a person who's in a profession that is looked at as somebody who just helps others. We have several people here who are in that kind of work. And there's kind of a result there. One of the results, we need to get paid, of course. The other result is we need to have somebody needs to get better because of what we're doing and be grateful to us. I mean, I'm just painting a little picture here, but one who is operating out of clarity. In other words, clarity. This doesn't mean that there's not some kind of self-centeredness functioning, but the awareness that sees it as unreal, So there's no point in fighting with the ego. You fight if you try to become. And sometimes people say, well, I just did this and I did that. And it just seems so egotistical. And I think, yeah, it is. Congratulations, you just saw something that's not true. But you don't want to get rid of that. You can't really help people who are struggling with their self-centeredness if you see the unreality of self-centeredness and thereby get rid of it. That's a form of spiritual materialism, getting somewhere using spiritual techniques. But if you see what this is, then you can function by way of helping others, serving others, meeting others where they're at, with no claim on production, no desire for something else, no merchandising mentality. It's not a business. You just give. And if things come back, fine. If they don't come back, fine. This doesn't mean you might not think, why don't I get any recognition for all this wonderful, selfless, heroic work I'm doing? Is that helpful? It's an open dimension. There are beings who think they're real, and you meet them where they're at. And if you're functioning in this path, you know you're not real. You're there. You have nerve endings, but you notice that it is dependently arisen, and you are not a solid, real being. And life and death are not two different things anymore. I'm not saying that the body won't go away, but you're that awareness that is aware is not a self. In our tradition, we would call it Buddha nature, but it's not a being. You get no credential, get no gold star. Might get a kick in the butt. Any final question? Well, then I have no final answers. Thank you so much.
We'll stand and dedicate the merit at the back of our chant books. I also like to remind everybody about this Saturday is our all-day retreat. Please join us if you can. And also, we do still have our donation boxes in the hallway and appreciate whatever financial support you can help us with. We also receive donations online through PayPal, debit and credit cards. Thank you.
May the merit of this penetrate into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Shi-ho-san, shi-hi-shi-fu. Shi-san, bu-sa, mo-ko-sa. Mo-ko-ja-oro-mi. The 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna Paramita. O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect SokukoJi Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.